All right, everybody, we are back again for episode I don't even know because we've been doing so many recordings, but we've got another special guest with us here today. As always, hit the subscribe button, comment, like, all that good stuff to help this thing continue to grow and go in the right direction. It's your boy, Coach Coop, today, and we have with me my boy, Jack Santora. He is known as the muscle mobility maker, has helped over 200 plus bodies through strength and mobility, owner and operator of Stronghold Strength and Conditioning. He's a father, a husband. Welcome, Jack, to the show. But most importantly, bro, before we even jump into everything, how are you doing, man? Like, how is life going for Jack?
Thank you, Coop. First of all, it is busy right now. Honestly, we're in the process of preparing our home to sell, so it's been like that point where you're like trying to just hurry and get everything ready and the yard work. I mean, I've moved so much mold and stone in the past. This is when I'm really glad that I'm labeled as the muscle and mobility maker, honestly, because
Of
it's
course.
that daily stuff. And then I've got two young kids who are one's gonna be 5 soon in August, and then 7 just turned 7 in March. So they're both young and highly active, and really want a lot of my attention and energy. So all in all, it's all good stuff. The business is growing in a good direction, and things are really moving well with that. And it's a good busy, but it's still a busy, right?
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah, we always talk about how we want to be busy, like at the times that we have a lot of like downtime. And then we get busy, we're like, man, I could really use some free time right now. But it's always good to get
Yep.
busy because that means that you're heading in the right direction, you're heading the way that you kind of envisioned everything. Um, so really, excited to hear kind of what got you started in this industry and why such a huge, because you do focus on the strength and conditioning side, but there's also a huge focus for you on the mobility side. Why that?
Yeah, it goes back a bit. So I'll give you a little bit of background where it all kind of started in the roots. I mean, my goal initially as a young kid was to go professional playing soccer. So I wanted to play at a high level for soccer. I mean, I was on multiple teams at one time, where it was playing for 2 or 3 teams at a time when it was at its most,
Yeah.
and I played from 4 to, I mean, I still kick around a little bit, but it's obviously not at that professional level I was ever hoping to be at. I played up through club. I was on a club team at Ohio State in college, so that was kind of the highest level that I ended up playing. And my goal was, again, if I couldn't go pro, I always wanted to work with athletes in some way, shape, or form. In college, the first year, I didn't even have, I hadn't even declared anything yet. I was still trying to figure out what that looked like. I felt like I didn't want to do PT, which is kind of the ironic thing because now I'm dealing with aches and pains as kind of like a regular basis. But I ended up going in at exercise physiology. So that was kind of the entryway there, as an exercise physiologist through school. Studied nutrition as well, got a minor in nutrition. And then out of college, for work, I ended up actually starting as, it was, again, a very unlikely place for me to end up, but it was a cardiac rehab center associated with a hospital. So I was in Columbus, so the doctors there were associated with the Columbus Blue Jackets. We had a team of physical therapists. I mean, it was a general fitness center, but it was quite a variety of situations that you'd see. And I'd say the average age of the individual that was going there was probably in their 50s or 60s. So I
Right.
did see a lot of aches and pains, even as just a trainer and exercise physiologist in that setting. The funny thing was that was my internship, my last portion of quarter of college there. And I ended up getting invited to work as their aquatic staff, as a swim instructor and a group exercise instructor in the pools. And if you knew anything about how I could swim, I almost needed somebody to save me when I was getting my lifeguard certification for that job. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how place that, but I was like, okay, it's a job. It's in the degree that I'm actually trying to get work in. I'm going to make this work. And from there, um, you know, my boss at the time, when she was inviting me in, she's like, look, you can build up your training as much as you want to, and we'll let you work up on the floor with all the strength equipment as much as you need to. But I do need you to teach some aquatic classes and, do some of the pool watching and that kind of stuff. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna make this work. So through that, I actually found another position at a sports performance center that was with another guy that was still kind of connected to that facility. And it was speed and agility. Sports performance was heavily focused on soccer. It was called Super Kick. And that was associated with the Columbus Crew at the time. So they would kind of come and train in that facility. So I literally joke around with everybody that I've trained people from the ages of 4 up to 80, 90 years old, because there's truth in it. I mean, I've worked with people, and it really gave me a unique experience in that way, where like I just picked up things that, there was obviously that sports performance side of stuff. I'm a certified, or I was a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So NSCA, CSCS, I had that for a decade, and I was using that at the time. And that experience was just very unique. But really what got me into the mobility end of it was early, like my mid 20s, early to mid 20s. I was just starting this job. I was very active in that. I was doing my own training, and I ended up starting to have issues. And I'm like, wait, I'm in my mid 20s. I should not be feeling like this. And I'm the guy training people so they're not supposed to feel like this, right? So like it didn't make sense to me, and it didn't line up. And I was friends with one of the doctors of the Blue Jackets, and I liked his approach because he's a CrossFit athlete. He was minimal invasive. If he could figure out a way around it without doing any other type of shots or things like that, that was kind of like his final go to. I went and talked to him, and he just kind of was like, looked at a few pieces of my mobility, and he's like, "Here, you need to look into this a little bit more." And he's just like, direct me down the path of that mobility. And once I started to do it, it was incredible, because I was like, okay, there is something very powerful in this right here. I could feel the own changes in my own body that I was experiencing. I started to use it in the training with the members that I was working with. And at the time, I had a full schedule of 50 clients in 40 hours that I was kind of backed and stacked up in small groups and partners and that kind of stuff, on top of the classes that I was still teaching in groups. So I was really starting to try and just play with it and implement it in a very unorganized fashion
Yeah.
in that training and in that coaching in that way, and experimenting in my own body to see what was really happening there, and seeing how I could apply it in that way. So that's kind of how I got into all of it in the very first place. A very long-winded version of
I
it.
mean, I mean, it's impressive though too, because like you said, you were still trying to play at the time, like you were still trying to be an athlete and whatnot. But what was that transition like? You know what I mean? Like you're knowing and finding out that now it's over, right? Playing isn't really going to happen at the level that you wanted to happen at, and now you're kind of going into, it's not really an unfamiliar field because you were training like an athlete anyway before, but now you're going into something where you got to swim, right? You got to teach group classes, but then you're also still trying to work the strength and conditioning side. How did you mentally check out of, all right, I got to let go of being an athlete and getting to this part and fully dive into it?
I'll be honest, it stung a little bit, right? Because I was like, I could do this. I knew I had the skill level, and I still believe I could have, in the right circumstances, taken it to another level with my play, had things panned out a different way. But I also, just with my background a little bit, I'm a believer. I believe that God's hand was in it and that He was directing my path. And I have 20/20 hindsight on it. So looking back, it's like, wow, it all starts to make perfect sense. But at the time, obviously, I was like, man, and I wasn't saved at that point in my life, I should say, either. When I was coming out of college, and that was like that was my life. So
Right.
it really hurt. I was like, I put hours upon hours, and sweat, blood, tears, aches, injuries, all those things into the
Yeah.
okay. And then in one fell swoop, I tried to walk on OSU's team at that point. I was on the club team already. I had made that. I was like, all right, good. We got that step in. Tried to walk on, and their head coach just like took all the wind out of my sails at that time. He was just like, none of you are as good as any of the recruits we just picked up. So have a nice day. That was basically the sentence that we all got. And it was like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
now what, right? So yeah, so going out of college, it's like, well, of course I'm going to take this opportunity as a job someone's offering me. I can at least start to financially support myself in that way. And it ended up working out where I eventually did get into at least coach soccer. And I did coach at a high school in the area for a little bit at the same time, through that opportunity. So like these doors started to open up where it's like, okay, I still get to be around the sport that I love and that passion. And I still get to help athletes in that way. And at the same time, I was still trying to help. I wanted to help people in that facility as the trainer, as the exercise physiologist, as I was. So I was doing my best to adapt to the aquatic situation, even though I sunk like a rock. I mean, how does a rock adapt to water? We just,
Yeah.
we figure it out. But it took time to adapt to that and really get used to that. But again, looking back, it's like if I had not had any of that experience or been around the people that I was around and learned from them in that situation, well, then what I'm doing today, I probably wouldn't have the growth that I'm seeing in my business that I am, because it is a wide experience that I had, and it really has helped me just to be able to pick up like even individual situations. I can still think of like, well, this helped this person, let's apply it to this individual, because I still treat what I do is tailored mobility training programs for everybody based off of their needs and what their goals are. So I'm taking into account what's highly effective in these situations and tallying that up as we go along, what's really effective and what's not. And that's been helpful in that way, I
Yeah.
guess, to
I
kind
mean,
of give
I
you an
think
answer there.
every step you take, you got to kind of learn from it, and what can you take to actually advance to going forward, and how can you apply it to things that you're using now. But you said, you had a coach that, you were feeling these pains, right? These things that you're trying to help people become better at, and you're having all these mobility issues yourself. And now you're going to another coach to ask, like, hey, what am I doing? How can I get
Yeah.
better? How did you get to that point to where, you've got enough humility to say that, hey, I'm not doing something right in my own training program. How can I get better? And how can you show me it? And then how can I teach it to others?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I think I had built up a trust factor with that doctor specifically at the time. I mean, obviously he had, his credentials were huge right there. He's working with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he, for me again, I looked at, okay, he's active, and I just knew that he wasn't invasive in his approach. So I just had that trust factor with him where I was like, all right, I have a pain that I can't figure out right now. Originally, it was like I thought I had a hernia. There was a severe pain in like my hip flexor region, right in that inguinal crease. And I was like, I can't get this figure one out. So I went to him, and that was, he checked me out a little bit, made sure it wasn't a hernia. Like, no, you're good there. It's just inflammation. Take this. Let's look at what your mobility looks like overall. And then he gave me some resources as well. He's like, you should look deeper into this. So I mean, just having that guidance, and again, that trust level in the beginning was like, yeah, I mean, it completely makes sense for me to actually at least give this a try. And then once I started to do that, it was hilarious because I identified so many issues in my own body. When I would squat, my hip would pop out of place. I remember my knees hurting like really stiff, bad, where I couldn't even squat down to the bottom of the closet to pick up shoes out of the closet. And I
Yeah.
remember that one being a big one because I was like, if my knees feel like this in my 20s, I'm either not going to have them in my 50s and they're not going to be my own, or it's going to be severe at that point. So like there were these warning signs that I just couldn't ignore at that point, right? I believe I tore my labrum in my left shoulder at one point in time doing pull-ups where I just came down really hard and it yanked the shoulder, and I just had this posterior shoulder pain for a while. So it was kind of these multiple things that were just like, you can't ignore this. You can't ignore this. And it kind of gave me like that, what is it, imposter syndrome, where I was like, again, you're training these people to be
Yep.
healthy, fit, and I see this a lot because it's like people expect you to be in that position where you're like, you're fit, you're healthy, you look the part,
Should have the
but
perfect body,
internally
right? Everything should be
internally
perfect.
the looks don't match up, right?
Yeah.
So you see that a lot, and that's where I was, and it bothered me. It really bothered me because I was like, yeah, I kind of felt like a fake at that point, and I was like, we got to get this to line up a lot better. And again, as I started to do it, it was like no brainer. Okay, this is. It was funny because as I switched, because I was doing long workouts, putting a lot of time in, and I found that like a lot of the corrective work that I was doing in those exercises, I was like dripping sweat like I'd never worked out before in my life. It's like just because there was that intentionality and focus
Yeah.
that I obviously, and it's like, what in the world is going on? But clearly this is a good thing because if this is making me sweat like this, and I mean, I'm like going from squatting like 300 plus to just a bar and reworking my form. And again, it's like just like wet. How is that even possible? But
Yeah.
so, just things that I think about when I think about the path I took and kind of how that all played out.
No,
It's
that's
things I laugh
yeah,
at.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, you're going back to relearning things. You know what I mean? Stuff that you thought you were doing correctly and properly, and now you're trying to figure out the different ranges of motion and what to do here, what to do there. And like it's hard. You know what I mean? Especially when you've done it for so long for one way. You know what I mean? It's like teaching an old dog new tricks. But I think it's awesome to hear that you had the humility to go back and reteach yourself and have others assess you on, what you were doing wrong. And now you're in a position to where you're the guy that people come to. You know what I mean? Like over 200
Yeah.
plus people come to you about talking about mobility. That's the huge thing. You know what I mean? And we're not just talking about like strength side. Like I don't need just a program to go out there and tell me to squat this. And like we're talking about like all the factors that go into play with it. How are you assessing people's mobility when they first come to you?
Okay. Yeah. So when I start with somebody, what do we initially do? And I've got a couple of these. Like I said, I got one at 11:30 coming up. I call it my mobility blueprint call, essentially. So initially, when I'm first talking with people in DMs, I'm just gathering general information to see if they'd even be a good fit for what I'm offering in the first place. So I'll talk them through questions, and usually it's if they just mention like, "Hey, I have this ache or pain that I'm dealing with," and I'm genuinely being curious about the situation. It's like, can you describe your pain to me? Do you have any history of injury? What are your, what do you see any of these postural changes in your body that are indicating maybe anything bigger going on at the grander scale? So those are kind of just my initial questions that I'll enter in with, and I'll send them some content based off of what they tell me, just so that they can at least maybe look at it, take some steps, get to know who I am. And I'm giving them stuff that I think truly, genuinely would help them in their situation when they do that. So I have that initial contact with them. After that, I will ask them if they want further help. Because right there, a lot of people, that's what we had just talked about, that pride. I'm going to do this on my own at this point, or yes, I would like help. And I recognize that I do need help. And that's fine. And I recognize that in people. So I try and, just put that offer out there. Would you possibly like to work with me? We get them scheduled for a call when they're ready. It's a Zoom call, so we're live on Zoom, where I will recap what we talked about in the DMs just to make sure there's no miscommunication of what text they had sent over to me, of my understanding of what they're dealing with. I'll take them through a full assessment based off of what their conditions are that they're experiencing. So, I mean, I'm looking at, if it's lower body, I'm usually looking at their feet, their hips, what's happening with their spinal posture, if they have good core organization and stability there. Similarly with their shoulders, looking at how their shoulders are functioning, the scapula are functioning, looking at the spinal positioning, how well they organize around that. So I take them through this assessment, and just based off that assessment, that's going to tell me everything I need to know about what they're experiencing, honestly. So it's very visual, but also verbally described to me as we're going through it. I'll be asking if there's any differences that they're feeling from side to side. I'll be looking for any differences that are standing out as they're getting measured in their different positions that I'm taking them through. And I'm using just regular movements, even like squats, to say, okay, this shows me this in how you're moving, and I use that as their data to provide their program for them based off of that. So I'll describe the program to them, give them the details of coaching, and they get to again decide, do I want the further help or not from there. Right.
And
So
you're able to do all this through Zoom.
yeah.
So now, for me, because I'm a hands-on guy, and everybody knows that, I'm very much like I've done the online programming and done online coaching, but I know myself well enough to know that I like to be in person working with people one-on-one. But now you're talking about mobility and being able to see people's limitations of the range of motion and their posture and all this stuff. What exactly are you looking at and looking for, and how are you able to see it through Zoom? I mean, obviously over 200 plus bodies, you've seen everything, right? After a few times of seeing stuff, you'd be like, all right, I can already tell this is wrong. But like,
Yeah.
how did you know where?
Well, so their symptoms, are a piece of the puzzle. Their movement quality is a piece of the puzzle. So what I'm starting to do from the very start is trying to put all these pieces together just through the questions I'm asking them, and then on the actual visual assessment, that's what confirms what my thoughts are already from there. From there, my goal is always to work with systems as a whole. Okay, so I think of your body as systems of overlapping systems in a way. Your legs are a system, your core is a system, your shoulders are a system, your arms are a system that we're working together, and the function of the system at the center impacts the extremities, and vice versa. It's a cyclical relationship there that we're looking at. Again, all of those little pieces that I see when I'm assessing somebody are coming together in my mind as the actual focus for their program at that point. Okay, so if it's somebody again with a lower body issue, maybe they're struggling with knee pain, and I see that they're flat-footed or their foot turns out, or they've got bunions or hammer toes, those are all bodily indicators that the function at those specific joints are off, and they're influencing what's happening up above at the knee. And likely, if we see issues down below at the ankle, well, I'm probably going to find something up at your hip as well that's going to be a problem in that. And then, if we kind of address both of those together, you start to see the whole system improve overall. So it's kind of building it a lot of times from the foundation up in that way. We do have to be aware of what's happening at their core. I'll always ask if there's ever been any spinal injuries or any spinal alterations that have taken place, because that's one of the first places we do want to begin. If your spine is out of position, it's altering the mechanics, what's happening down below, just like your feet. Or if we're talking about like a pull up where we're hanging and our hands are the anchor or the base, that's impacting from the extremity inward. So again, it is individualized in that way, where I'm always just really picking apart the situation and looking at they're telling me, everything they're telling me, that what they're verbally telling me and what they're physically showing me, whether they recognize it or not. And this is another important part, because I'll ask people about their postural changes that they see, but they don't always recognize that those are that there are negative indicators there, or they'll think it's not as bad. Okay, we always like to soften the blow for ourselves in that way,
Yeah.
where it's like, no, I don't really have much of those issues. I'm good.
Nah, it bothers me
And
to
then I
to sleep and everything, but it's not too bad.
yeah, we're good. We're good. It wakes
Yeah,
me up at night. I'm tripping
but
over
I'm
my
still,
own feet.
yeah, I'll go back to sleep eventually, and then I'll be all right. But
Yep.
I mean, it's super impressive, to hear, like, to be able to see these things through Zoom, and then also just like take the pieces that they're telling you and like kind of like a puzzle, putting it together on like how to make them better. Now, with athletes that are coming to you, like a big question is, what are some of like the common mobility issues you see for field sport athletes?
Field sport. Usually I'm hearing about feet, ankles, and hips a lot for most field sports, realistically. Yeah.
And then,
And I think just being a field sport athlete myself, and seeing my history of, like, looking back again, the amount of time that I played soccer, if I look at my feet when I played soccer and the shape that they actually had, the structure they had, and the feet that I have now because of all the work I've done on structuring my base and building that back up, completely different feet. My feet were literally the shape of a soccer cleat. I had terrible heel pain when I'd play games. I had to wear inserts, and I would grind holes in the heels because of how rough I was impacting the ground and how much the pressure was in my heel when I was cutting and turning. And I would get a new pair every season, if it wasn't even two pairs a season, because of how my feet were actually just tearing apart those insoles. I mean, like Dr. Scholl's, athletic insoles. But it helped the pain at the time. But again, it's one of those Band-Aid solutions for something that I was really experiencing. And then later on, recognizing my hip is also popping out of place on this side, and my knees are really stiff, and it's that chain again. You start to see, okay, the foundation is very terrible in this case. We need to really build that back up. And as soon as that starts changing, well, now you've set a foundation that the rest of that structure can realign itself and work off of, where its stability is just incredibly enhanced. in that way. But yeah, I mean, for field athletes, that's one of the biggest
Yeah.
ones, just because of, I think a lot of times just even the footwear that they have options of, there's not good options realistically. They're trying, but they're also really expensive right now because they're only the only brand out there, that kind of thing like that, you know?
Right, right.
So,
And a lot of these athletes, I mean, sometimes when you're at the bigger places, you have access to get custom insoles and everything made, but that's also still, that Band-Aid that you talk about. You know what I mean? Like they're just trying to get
yep,
you to play, get on the field, play as quickly as possible. Your 4 years, you're in and out. And if you make it to the pros, cool, but at least you did your job here, right? To help us win games.
right.
And all right, we've done our little bit, right? The next level can handle you guys now from here. So with an athlete with like that has, those major feet injuries and like the foot complex is such a huge part of just like directing the chain and like you said working with the systems. What are you doing like for if we're just talking about like a general athlete that's coming to you with like major foot issues? What are you doing with them? Like could you tell us like a small portion of like how you correct their feet?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start with the toes. I mean, looking at their toes. So if they have bunions or hammer toes, we know that we need to create some more spacing back at the foot. A lot of times with a bunion, what's happening is they're missing toe extension in that way. So the toes don't bend back the way that they should. So the toe wants to move inward. And then you also start to see the foot turn out from that as well. So again, it's the whole structure starting to change from the ground up because of that. That bunion then causes the other toes to feel scrunched, so they'll start to curl up and get out of the way. So you kind of see these issues starting to overlap with one another, especially again in those boots where it's just very compact, and especially a soccer cleat is very narrow where it's pushing both sides in at the same time. So I work on regaining splay in that area, both passive and active. So their ability to actually spread their toes out is a big place to start. Getting your fingers between your toes. If you can't stick your fingers between your toes, you got a problem. If it's painful to stick your fingers between your toes, it's a problem. It shouldn't be like that. So I don't care how fat your fingers are. Realistically, get your fingers in between your toes and do that every night, because your feet are something you're constantly. I mean, the majority of people are in terrible footwear every day of their life right now. Yes, again, there's minimalist options out there that are making it better. There's still limited minimal options for like dress shoes and things like that. So it's like, or boots, another one that's hard to find minimalists in. And I have issues trying to get people to fully convert. But here's the thing: every time I start getting people to work on their feet at the very beginning of their program, 4 weeks later, they'll come to me and say, all right, I got to throw out my old shoes. What shoes do you recommend at this point? So it literally is getting to the point where they finally have recognized that, wow, this is why my feet are uncomfortable. My feet no longer fit in this shape of the shoe, and they have to switch footwear. Otherwise, you're going to spin your tires all the way. You're gonna hit that roadblock because you're fighting yourself. You're wearing something that's not conducive to the shape that you're actually trying to take your foot into. So, I mean, other things that we'll do with display would be like even just being passive in the form of wearing toe spacers. So you could wear them throughout your day. Being as barefoot as much as possible is going to be helpful in the process. If you can't quite do that, that's just spend as much time barefoot as you can. Wear toe spacers when you can. If you can work out barefoot, I think that's a huge advantage, because now you're naturally just opening up the opportunity to strengthen your feet against the load that you're working with. And even if you need to wear toe spacers to create that shape that we want while you're working out, that can be extremely helpful as well. So a lot of that, working on active extension of the toes in that way, being able to flex and grip strong. I've got exercises that I call pin and fan. So we're working on the actual ability to root well. So the first metatarsal pins down, the fifth metatarsal will fan out, keeping the heel down. So a lot of intrinsic foot strengthening work. And I've had people that say, I used to walk a certain way, or I used to be flat footed, and all of that is changing in their body from the ground up. People talking about muscles in their feet. They actually see muscles in their feet that they didn't know were there, because you've developed those muscles now. But it's just like any other, I mean, to dumb it down, it's just like a machine, right? You would want every piece of that machine to be working properly in order for the machine to be as efficient or as properly functioning as it should be. Well, your body's no different. You have each of these joints for a reason. They each have a purpose. are they doing their job, or is the next joint upstream having to compensate and make up for that? So you get to these small degrees of change, but they add up to a big issue in the long run, overall in that way.
Oh yeah, I definitely know for sure after this season I'm gonna be hitting you up because man, my feet are ugly, right? Because I've been plenty of years in cleats, right? I've got one toe that goes underneath the others, and then like the whole
Okay.
space. Not your I wear toe spacers every once in a while, because I saw that it's good for you and whatnot. But definitely got to take you up on, learning more about, how to get it better. Because I've got knee issues. I've got it all from being a football player. Um, and I want to be able to walk around and play with my 2-year-old daughter once this season is over because I already
So,
can see it creeping up.
yes, sir. Well, and to give you an idea of how severe it was in my feet, on my right foot, I couldn't abduct my smallest toe, and it took 5 years to actually get control back on that about. I did the
Wow.
same stuff because I knew it was good for the rest of my foot, but I had no feeling, no control, and then one day I felt a little spark, and I was like, okay. And then from there, now I can control it. Is it the same as my other foot? Not quite yet, but it has improved drastically from not being able to feel that toe and actually control it and move it to now I can actually move that toe and create some space. And it took about 5 years of
Yeah.
just consistent work doing the stuff.
And as we sit here, I'm thinking about like what toes can I wiggle and not wiggle,
Right,
trying
right.
to figure out
What
which ones are not good, good or not. Yeah, but that's because you as we get older in the sport and we start to realize and understand our bodies a lot more, we start to see where the pains start from. For me, like I've had 2 ankle surgeries on my right ankle, and then that I realized that I start overcompensating how I walk, and then I've got now my left knee hurts when I walk. I had shoulder surgery on my right shoulder, so I would always sleep on my left shoulder, and now my left shoulder hurts to sleep on. So like now I'm just a back sleeper because I'm like I don't want either shoulder to hurt. So like you're hearing all these things on like, all right, if we just take care of these little pieces, like how it can help you down. Even now even you probably have people that come to you with like finger issues and whatnot. Like for me, this hand is just messed up. It's ugly. I've got to get a finger surgery because I tore a ligament in my pointer finger. So eventually, like now, I got to work on the mobility of that to come back again. So like you already know now, after this podcast is done in about 3 weeks, you know who's going to be hitting you up, right? Because I got a whole bunch of questions on this whole
Yeah.
thing because I feel like there's so much that I've neglected. And like you said, there's that imposter syndrome. Like I'm talking to athletes of like how to run fast, how to jump high, how to be explosive on the field and stuff. And there's a piece in there that needs to be addressed. But there's sometimes that I can't even, demo some of these things because of the limitations that I have. Now, hearing from a guy like you it helps to realize that, it's okay to have them now, but you got to figure out a way to address them, fix them, so you're able to be the person that you talk about being for these athletes and wanting to show them the way to go. And even not just athletes, just your everyday people, and I
Yeah.
think that's super impressive and important and awesome to hear from a guy like yourself, to that you address all these things early on, and now you're actually able to do these things in full range of motion. And yeah, you still have limitations, like we all still have them, but
Yeah.
continuing to learn. Now, Jay, just recently got an injury this weekend. That's why he couldn't be with us. He hurt his groin, right? So he wanted me to definitely ask you about this. He said he
Yep.
wanted to know, how would you assess an athlete that presents tenderness in his upper groin when sprinting and abduction in a prone straight leg and 90-degree position?
All right. So in his groin, repeat that for me one more time
Yeah,
so I hear all
so
of it again.
presents tenderness in his upper groin when sprinting and abduction in prone straight leg and 90-degree position.
Prone straight leg, 90-degree position, tenderness in his hip flexor range there, upper groin. Yeah. So for me, yeah, with the sprinting and position of 90-degree straight leg, to me that is pointing to some of his hip flexor. It sounds like a little bit in that way. How did his injury occur? You said it was during a game.
Yeah, it was in the game. So the funny thing about this, because I'll tell you beforehand, because Jay and I were talking last week, and he's like, "Man, I got this little bit of pain in my hip flexor." I was like, "Bro, take it easy now. Like we're getting to that age where like you start feeling something, you go out there and still try to be Superman. Something else will happen, right?" So he said last week he was feeling a little bit of pain in that hip flexor, and I was like, "Man, I remember I had that
So
before."
that's normal.
Yeah, I was like, I had that before, and then it ended up I hurt my groin, and then I didn't want to say that I said so, but I said so.
Yeah, so generally, just to give you an idea of what I'll start with, is in soft tissue injuries, it can be, we want to make sure that we're gradually reintroducing movement to the area and really starting to build that back up. And it can be very gradual. I think a lot of people get caught up in how much sometimes they have to scale something back in the beginning when there's an injury like that. But it's okay. I would rather you scale it back as much as you need to and just start to reintroduce movement to that area as much as you're able to, because we're going to start to draw blood flow into that area. And just keep it basic in the beginning with that. But generally, just to give you an idea of how I'll work with people, is I tend to address the joints first. So we want to make sure that we're looking at joint position for something like that, his hips, his pelvis, his spinal positioning, making sure that those things are all checking out the way that they should. If he's showing any issues there, that would be kind of the one first place I would start with. The second piece is, to dumb it down a little bit, I call it flexibility. But really, when I'm looking at flexibility, it's usually the quality of the soft tissues and the balance of those soft tissues. So a lot of times when we end up with strains or muscle injuries like that, we tend to be overusing those tissues in the long haul. And they've finally come to the point where they're saying, time's up. You've got
That's
your
it.
max use out of me. And you got to think about what was balancing on the other end of that injury. Okay. So in the case of hip flexors, we're looking at what's happening at the glutes, and a lot of those posterior tissues, how strong those are, how well they were stabilizing the pelvis. And you could go into even like obliques, QL, abdomen, what's going on around there, making sure that all of that stuff around the lower back and pelvis is just working together the way that it should in that way. Another thing I use regularly with my any of my members who have had soft tissue injuries is systemic enzymes. And this could be surgeries as well. So if you had surgeries or injuries, I'll use systemic enzymes, because the systemic enzymes circulate in your body and help break down scar tissues in your body over about like a 12-hour period. So I'll always use that in combination with the mobility work that we're doing. And that can be a pretty powerful combination in itself right there. I don't see it as a cure-all of its own, but there's some really cool stuff that can happen from using that. Again, I've used it with people with multiple surgeries who just were having trouble, and they used it regularly in combination with the mobility work, and it turned out to be a really good combination there. But also in the flexibility category, I'll kind of put in like self-myofascial release techniques, things like that. So we'd want to be addressing any issues around the lower abdomen, oblique, QL, the glute range again, even getting into the hip flexors some, teaching people ways to do that with just even foam rollers, lacrosse balls, something around like the extremities. I'll use more as mobility floss, if you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one a lot because of the blood flow restrictive effect of it. So that's a big one that I use pretty regularly. And then the last piece is restabilizing and strengthening that range again. So I'll always work kind of in those three pillars right there that I just mentioned. So it's the joint itself, the soft tissues around that joint, and then the stability and strength. And really in all of those, there's still some overlap. They're not, exclusive pieces and parts of it, because they're just, the way our body's designed, there's always going to be that overlap. But again, it's more of to kind of create a system for people that's easier to follow, and even a system for myself to work through. Like in the beginning, I said it was very sloppy and disorganized. Well, now that's kind of how I've been able to organize it well, where I am able to help people better in a different way that they might not normally be getting help too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully that helps give
No,
him some ideas.
that for sure helps me to even tell him what he needs to do, and definitely tell him to hit you up so he can get even more in detail with it. But I know we've got a little bit of things coming up, and I know you're a busy guy, got a lot of schedule on. So where is Jack in 5 to 10 years?
That's a good question. I wish I had an answer for that realistically, because if I say now, I know it's going to look completely different than what I just guessed. My goal has always been to help as many people as I could possibly help through this business. That was one of my biggest frustrations with the previous position that I held. I felt like I hit that glass ceiling. I couldn't take on any more people in my schedule. All my classes and that kind of stuff was getting packed and booked out. So eventually I'd always talked about, hey, I might own my own gym someday or own my own business in that way someday. I never thought that it would be strictly online. I'll be honest. So if you would have asked me 10 years ago, this probably would have never been a part of my plan, right?
Yeah.
But here we are, and again, it's kind of just I've wanted to help people in a bigger way. My goal is always just to expand this one day at a time and just continue to help it grow one day at a time. And it has been one of the hardest things I've done in my life. So in 5 years, I would love to see just a few things in my own business that it would change. I would say that maybe I am able to actually do a little bit more of live clinics again or something like that, where it's in-person coaching in the way that I'm teaching groups or working at gyms to help their coaches or their athletes in that way, possibly just having a little bit more of the overall expansion where even helping the people I'm helping is kind of bleeding out beyond that, if that makes sense as well. And just seeing just the reach that it has. And I know it's possible because I've already heard people say, hey, I sent somebody this and they felt this impact from it. Or somebody will come to me and they say, yeah, I'm here because one of my friends sent me something from you and I found it really helpful. And that's the lifeblood right there, to have like even those little comments and whatnot when everything just feels like,
What
I've
am I
had somebody say,
doing?
"What are you
Yeah.
working out of a bomb shelter?" And it's like, well, kind of feels like that
It's
some days, but no, it's my basement and my children are right upstairs and I get to be close to my family. So it's a wonderful thing in that way. But yeah, I get it. I get it.
hey man.
But we are moving.
Sometimes
So it won't look like a bomb shelter anymore.
is a new place gonna have an outdoor one now this time?
So it's a bonus room. It'll
Okay.
be a little bit more homey setting, I guess, in that way. I don't
Okay.
know.
Hey man, sometimes you just gotta get it how you live, man. Whether it's in the basement, it's outside, it's in a little homey section, wherever it is, man. As long as you're getting your work in, it doesn't matter, So kudos to you, man, for everything that you're doing over there. But it's a gym, right? You're able to do what you need to do. You're able to get all your workouts in.
Well, and again, as long as I'm able to see the benefits that I need in my own workouts, and as long as I see the results that I'm needing to see in people, I don't really care where the work comes from. I mean, I could be in a bomb shelter. That's cool.
Hey,
Whatever.
the
Yeah,
bomb shelter got
if
a
it's
got a weight
helping,
rack. I'm good.
exactly. So yeah, that's all I see is I want to let the stories that come from the work I'm doing be what speaks for me realistically, and my goal is just to keep building that number up that you see on my profile right now, and just keep adding stories there. So
I love it, man. I love it. Like I said, I've been following your work, seeing what you're doing over there. But we got our last segment of the day, right? It's a 90-second round, right? You got one word answer. It's
okay,
only 10 questions, right? It
okay.
can be about anything, right? I've got these 10 questions
Well,
already
you didn't
written
prep
up
me
for
for this
you.
stuff. All right,
Yeah, I know I didn't prep you for it. That's the fun part about it. So it's 90 seconds, one word
all right.
answers, random questions. All right, so you ready?
Yep.
All right, here we go. So first one, favorite post-workout snack.
Well, I eat breakfast after, so breakfast is not really a snack. By the time I work out, I just have all right.
Best coach you've
Eggs,
ever
I'll say.
Oh, eggs. All right. So best coach you've ever had.
Um, I'd say the one that led me in this direction. He wasn't intentionally my coach, but honestly, it was some of the sound advice that. So Doctor Dupour, I give him credit.
Favorite sport.
Soccer,
Pizza
my
or
passion.
burger.
That's a hard one. I'll go with pizza.
Top athlete you've ever trained.
Um, MMA fighter in Australia. I know that's not one word, but yeah.
Your favorite
So
exercise.
you're killing me. If I could only pick one, Turkish get up. Turkish
All
get up,
right.
yeah.
Best coach in the industry.
Ooh, Kelly Starrett's on top of the game. I'd have to say. I like a lot of his stuff.
What is your number one flaw as a coach?
Number one flaw as a coach. Again, there's multiple. So I'll go with I'm gonna have to say, oh man, I don't know how to put it in one word, but I would say business ownership and that coaching, I guess time management, balance in that way.
All right. Last one. Would you rather be in a ring with a gorilla, tiger, or a bear?
Tiger or bear? I don't think it matters. I'll be dead in either situation. Put me in there with yeah, just put me in there with Put me in with the Tiger. Let's get it over with quickly. In that case.
And that's the round. Man, I appreciate you coming on, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, if you have the chance, check out Jack's work, right? He's doing amazing stuff. And then, again, he's worked with 200 plus bodies. If you're having any aches, issues, pains, or even if you just need to learn more about mobility, hit up Jack. Doing great work. I know after my season, I'm going to be hitting him up because I need to get the feet fixed and all that other stuff. Jack, I appreciate you coming on and being here with us today and taking out the time of your busy day, man.
And tell Jay to shoot me a message. Definitely. Again, talk to him, get him in the right path here. But
Yeah, because
thank
he's
you
got a long
again.
season ahead. He's got 16 games, and I'm at 2 games left, and I'm retiring. All right, man.
All right,
I
man.
appreciate you.
Thank you so much.